Hi everyone, this is Brian Hayes and welcome to a discussion on how to play the very high notes on the alto saxophone. Today's tutorial will be looking at the altissimo register of the saxophone and focusing on the first two notes in the altissimo range. Altissimo just means very high notes, and the altissimo register begins where the normal playing range of an instrument ends. Now, not all saxophones have a high F sharp key built into them. This saxophone of mine does have that key. It's this one here, and you'll notice high up on the saxophone up here that the pad covering the highest hole drilled into the body of the saxophone opens and closes as I press the high F sharp key. Not all saxophones come equipped with the high F sharp key. The legendary Selmer Mark VI saxophone and saxophones of its era and before, so 1960s and older, normally won't have a high F sharp key built on the saxophone. Most beginners saxophones and even some intermediate models also don't have the high F sharp key. So in today's tutorial we'll be looking at an alternate way to play Altissimo High F sharp if your saxophone does not have the high F sharp key, and we'll also be looking at Altissimo G, that's G above high C on the saxophone. Now I have three very important disclaimers before we take this tutorial any further. The first one is you will need to understand and have completed the tasks in the tutorial I have online called Building Embouchure Strength for Wind Instrument Players. There's a simple exercise in that tutorial, but before you go trying to play high F sharp and high G on an alto saxophone, you really need to be able to do the exercise prescribed in that tutorial for at least 60 seconds and be able to do that exercise at the 60-second mark for at least 7 consecutive days before you even attempt to play these two altissimo notes on the saxophone. The second disclaimer is I want you to be fully up to speed with the tutorial called How to Play the High Notes on the Alto Saxophone. In that tutorial I take the viewer through the F chromatic scale right up to F over high C, 2 octaves every single note, and we really make sure that you can play the normal high range of the saxophone in that tutorial. And finally, if you are new to the saxophone, if you haven't got command of the range from F over high C down to low B flat on your saxophone, you really have no place delving around in trying to expand your high register at this point in time in your development. You will only potentially hurt yourself. You will potentially bruise your lips, maybe even cut your lips, and your chances of success are very slim if you haven't passed the criteria that I've just been through. The first thing we're going to look at is the conventional fingering to play high F sharp if your saxophone has the high F sharp key on it. Now, high F is played with the octave key, the 3 left-hand palm keys, and the top right-hand side key all engaged at the same time. On any saxophone that has the high F sharp key, you'll notice what I'm doing down here. With the third finger on my right hand, whilst holding the fingering for high F, I'm simply engaging the high F sharp key, and that will turn the high F into a perfectly in tune and an easy to produce high F sharp. So I'm going to play from high C sharp up to high F sharp now, so you can hear that new note, which is an altissimo note if your saxophone does not have the high F sharp key on it. Okay, so starting on high C sharp, we'll play high C sharp D, D sharp E, F and F sharp, and you can see there on my right hand I'm simply engaging the high F sharp key with my third finger on the right hand whilst holding the high F fingering. This is what those notes will sound like. So the F sharp is very strong and very clear. If you can get that to work on your saxophone and you've got the high F sharp key, the next thing I recommend you do is incorporating that new high note in a full 2-octave F sharp chromatic scale, like this. Now, with any new notes that you learn, it's a good idea to slur chromatic scales and tongue them. I'll just slur now a 2-octave F sharp chromatic scale, just so that that new high note becomes part of the standard note family that I feel comfortable in playing. Now, if your saxophone does not have the high F sharp key, the alternate fingering for Altissimo F sharp is the auxiliary high F key. So that's high C. I've got my octave key on the back engaged. I've got the normal finger for C, the second finger on my left hand, but I'm stretching up and pressing the auxiliary high F key on. Now, your saxophone may have a round button like mine, or it could have a teardrop designed key there, a different shaped key. But high C plus the auxiliary high F key gives us an alternate way to play the note F above high C. However, we're looking to play F sharp above high C. If we add in the bottom right hand side key, the key that you'd normally play with the note A to make it A sharp, but if you play auxiliary high F and add in the right hand side key, that gives you one of the best alternate ways to play high F sharp on a saxophone that does not have the high F sharp key. I can't stress enough, if your saxophone has a high F sharp key, use it. It's by far the best fingering on the alto saxophone for high F sharp. As far as tuning goes, volume, tone, use the key that's been designed on the saxophone to play that note. But if you've got, as I said, if you've got one of the original Selmer Mark 6s or a 1930s, 40s, 50s vintage saxophone, or a beginner's saxophone that doesn't have the high F sharp key, you can still play the note by playing the auxiliary high F and engaging the bottom of the right hand side keys. Let me play that alternate fingering for you now so that you can hear the difference in tone, and certainly it's preferential if you've got the high F sharp key to use that. Okay, so the auxiliary high F note is produced by playing high C and then putting the top button of the available ones on your left hand on in combination with high C. Let's get that note first of all. So I'm going to play high C, then I'm going to put the auxiliary high F key on. Okay, so that key was put on the saxophone. If you had to play, for example, a very fast F arpeggio, F-A-C, most players would use the auxiliary high F fingering in a progression like that, because it's just so much quicker than trying to flap your fingers around on both hands, all the fingers away from the keyboard on the saxophone. Now we can take advantage of that fingering by, as I said, adding in the side A sharp key to that F. And we'll get a good in tune F sharp, but it will be quite murky and I suppose stuffy compared to the actual F sharp that there's a hole drilled on your saxophone for. Okay, so here's the high F sharp. I'll play the F, then engage the bottom right hand trill key. Okay, so it's a perfect F sharp, but it's a little, on my saxophone and on all the altos I've had, it's a stuffy sort of note. And if we compare this note, the stuffy alternate fingering, to the normal long proper F sharp key fingering, to my ears there's absolutely no comparison. However, if you don't have the F sharp key, you can play Altissimo High F sharp. Okay, we now move on to High G above High C. This is the first genuine Altissimo note for all saxophones. So how do we play it? Well, it's nothing new. In 1940, Jimmy Dorsey released a book called Rhythmic Method for Saxophone Playing. It's a fantastic tutor book. It's still my all-time favourite saxophone tutor book, put out by Jimmy Dorsey around 1940. In that book, he had a series of fingerings for notes above high F. Now, Jimmy Dorsey's fingering for Altissimo G above high C is like I'm doing now. It's not a particularly easy fingering, but it sounds the best on all of the saxophones that I've played. And we play it by playing the first finger and the third finger on our left hand, our octave key on, and then the first finger and the third finger on our right hand. And just to make life interesting, we also have to engage the bottom right hand side key. Okay, so we've got fingers 1 and 3 on the left hand, 1 and 3 on the right hand, and then with our index finger on the right hand, we just push the bottom of those 3 right hand side keys on, plus the octave key. Okay, so I'm going to start on high C and play chromatically up C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, and then the new Altissimo G. Let's have a listen to how that sounds. Okay, so that's Altissimo G on the alto saxophone using Jimmy Dorsey's fingering that he published in about 1940. The change from high F sharp using the F sharp key to the G Altissimo fingering on the alto saxophone is quite tricky. It's much easier on the tenor saxophone, but on the alto saxophone it's a long and fast change for some of our fingers there. So let's have a look at some alternate fingerings that can place us closer with our fingers to the different keys required for the various chromatic notes. The first alternate fingering we're going to look at is an alternate way to play high E. Now again, this has been around for many years, and this fingering was included in Jimmy Dorsey's 1940s saxophone tutor book. So what we do is we play high C, we play the auxiliary high F, but we then put our third finger down on the G key. So instead of playing E as we would normally play it, we play it like this. And you can tell it's, it's a very in tune E. It's a slightly darker character. It's not quite as vibrant, and you would only use it as an alternate fingering. Now, what that E fingering there lets us do is if we just lift up our third finger, we automatically get the alternate high F fingering. If we then engage our bottom right hand side key and play the alternate high F sharp, the Altissimo High F sharp that we covered earlier in this tutorial, we've then automatically got our right hand in a better position to then shift to the G Altissimo fingering. So I'll just go through that again. If we play normal C sharp, normal D sharp, but instead of going to E as we traditionally would, if we play the alternate E fingering, and you can see what I'm doing there, I've got my C finger on, the auxiliary high F on, and my G key on. So it's a bit of a stretch there, but that gives us a good in-tune alternative high E. We then lift up our third finger, that gives us the auxiliary high F. We then put on the bottom of the 3 right-hand side keys, in other words, the normal A sharp key. That gives us a high F sharp. Then when we have to play the Altissimo G, on our right hand, we already have our index finger where we want it. We simply put on fingers 1 and 3, and you can see what I'm doing there. I've just got to push those 2 fingers down. I don't change where my index finger is positioned. And up here, you remember we've got to change from the auxiliary high F to 1 and 3. those fingerings will give us a smoother chromatic run up to the Altissimo G. We're still stuck with an awkward fingering for the high note, but that's a great in-tune, powerful high G. So let's just try now those alternate fingerings, playing the same run from high C up to Altissimo G. Did you notice how it was much smoother and I could join those notes together in a more genuine fashion as if I was playing it down an octave? So that's an example where the F sharp key fingering for the note F sharp is fantastic. If you've got the high F sharp key and you're only playing up to Altissimo High F sharp, that's the one and only fingering to use. However, we've just looked at an alternate set of fingerings that can take us right up to that high G in a chromatic run without this very difficult change here. So look what I'm doing here. I've got all of the palm keys on, I've got the octave key on, I've got my hand up here hitting the high E key, and then I've got my third finger on the high F sharp key. So I've got to go from that fingering to this fingering. I'll do it again. Now it can be done, but it's quite cumbersome. I hope you've enjoyed that brief introduction to the Altissimo register on the alto saxophone. It's important to realise that past masters of the saxophone, like Jimmy Dorsey, and this fantastic tutorial book he put out, the Jimmy Dorsey Saxophone Method, a school of rhythmic saxophone playing, published in around about 1940. All of the fingerings we used in today's tutorial are in this book. I still think they're the best Altissimo fingerings for the alto saxophone that I've run into, particularly from the point of view of the fingerings working on alternate brand saxophones. So if you're looking for a good saxophone tutor, you cannot go past the Jimmy Dorsey Saxophone Method. I strongly recommend it. It's so beautifully written. The exercises are incredibly musical. It takes you from low B flat up to double high C. Fantastic. Grab a copy and start learning something about the saxophone from one of the past masters of the alto saxophone. As always, keep in touch via my website, www.brianhayes.biz. That's B-I-Z. Drop me an email, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I really hope you enjoyed discovering the start of the extreme high range on the alto saxophone. Bye for now.